Number 1.
I was teaching English in a Southeast Asian country a few years ago. I'm an Australian girl and was in my early 20s at the time. It was a pretty lonely time. The classes I taught were night classes for young adults, and my fellow teachers were quite cliquey, and I had yet to break into their inner circle. I had made friends, but not many close ones. It's worth noting that I had a mobile phone, but no SIM card. My only means of communication were to latch onto Wi-Fi at bars, cafes, work, and my apartment. Anyway, the following happened on my day off when I was alone. I had caught the bus into town. I lived in a shared apartment about 40 minutes from the city centre to suss out the local museums and maybe see a movie. After 2 museums, multiple stops at air-conditioned bars for countless units of cigarettes and beer, I decided the afternoon was getting on. I was stinking hot and tired, so maybe I should head home. The sun was still out, but setting. It was about 4 PM and still quite light. I wasn't too familiar with the layout of the city and the bus route at this stage, but using my elementary navigational skills, I worked out a vague direction that I needed to walk to get to my bus stop. I was enjoying my slightly buzzed walk, following small back lanes closer and closer to this bus stop that I had been on the hunt for. I was keen to get home, so I wasn't really paying attention to anything except following the setting sun, so I would be heading west. I remember walking past a small shop front, with a man sitting out the front. The man was thin, 30s, and somehow crooked looking. It looks like his shoulders and hips were completely out of alignment or something. He wore this ratchety old hat, not a traditional hat like a baseball cap, and had an equally ratchety face. Anyway, there was a child, maybe 6 or 7, sitting next to him. At the time I thought it was sweet, father and son boutique shop type thing. I gave them a small, awkward smile as I walked past. I barely lifted my head. The little boy looked at me strangely. Suddenly, the man's eyes lit up like crazy. I remember seeing him in my peripheral vision spring up from the gutter with great enthusiasm. He didn't say a word or make a sound. He just stood up very quickly as I finished walking by. I think he took my small, awkward smile directed at the little boy as some kind of eerie invitation. I started feeling scared. And I'm admittedly not very street savvy, so I guarantee my anxious mannerisms were obvious. I quickened my pace, pulled my bag closer to my stomach, and put my head down. I pretended to slow down to fix my sandal, but really I was trying to throw a quick look behind me to see what was going on. The man had quickened his pace in the last 10 or so meters of following me. He was closing in. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't trying to get my attention. He was just following me in a completely empty back street, still smiling enthusiastically. At this point I was walking on the right hand side of the road, my head swimming with paranoid thoughts. I tried to calm down and test out what was going on. I simply crossed the road to see if he would follow. I didn't check for motorbikes. This is Southeast Asia, remember, cars are few and far between. It dawned on me that a motorbike going by would be actually quite a good thing, even if it did hit me. What did hit me suddenly was the thought that we were very, very lonely in this street. Sure enough, as I crossed, he quickly followed my path onto the other side of the street. My heart sank into my stomach. I had no idea how much longer this alley went on for. No windows looked out over it. Nobody was walking by. I didn't even really know what part of the city we were in. I couldn't speak the language very well. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I remember sending my boyfriend that morning saying that I was uncontactable for that day. In this country, Western women were usually subject to an element of creepiness. I knew that. But this felt different. Everything suddenly felt really wrong. Inherently wrong. I panicked more and pulled out my phone to pretend to make a phone call. I thought this might stop him. I was moving at a very fast pace, nearly jogging at this point. He was picking up his pace gradually, and the gap between us was now less than a few meters. To grab my phone, I had to rummage around through all of the mess in my bag, which had slowed me down a bit. I felt his presence closer behind me. I thought, fuck the phone, and then broke into a sprint. He started sprinting too. I remember making a noise, not quite a scream, more of a whelp. I shouted, "Stop now," in English, then, "No, and go, leave," in the native tongue of the country that I was in. I didn't turn around. My bag was smacking my thigh. My feet were pounding the concrete. My heart was racing. He was still behind me. I decided to make a bold move, which I'm glad I did. I saw another alleyway opening up to my left. It looked larger. I could see windows facing onto it. Here we go, I thought. I just need other people to be around, and this will be fine. I turned down into the alleyway, still shouting no in this language, and I couldn't see any faces in the windows. There were bikes out the front of people's houses, so it was likely that there were people around. I just kept on sprinting. Then, I got super lucky. After a few bends in this alleyway, I saw a huge intersection on the other side. I'm talking 8 or so lanes of traffic all over each other. This man was still pursuing me. I refused to look him in the eye, but he was fearless. He could hear me shout, and that hadn't stopped him. I finally thought, fuck you, buddy, when I saw an intersection. It was finally over, thank God. I exited the alley and saw the sweet comfort of buzzing motorcycles and other people's faces in front of me. I had no idea where I was in relation to the bus stop. I immediately decided that I was avoiding public transport today, so I looked for a taxi. I knew there were some legitimate private taxi companies and some dodgy ones by this stage. I waited until I saw a trusted brand parked on the other side of the intersection. I was fine. This was fine. The man had stopped when he'd seen me move into the business of the road. I glanced over my shoulder and the motherfucker stood there, waving at me from the exit point of the alley and the intersection. Just waving, casually. I recoiled in disgust, crossed my arms over my chest, something I do to relieve a bit of anxiety, and kept walking at a steady pace towards the cab. I hop in the cab and make my best attempt at speaking the local language, telling the driver my address and basic directions on how to get there. The driver had trouble understanding me, so I pulled out my notebook and wrote the address down for him. Unfortunately, my writing was quite difficult for him to read too, so I slowed down and tried to explain it more clearly. I wasn't really paying attention to anything going on, except helping the driver understand where I wanted to go. I heard the back door of the cab slam. The driver and I swung around. There he fucking was. He had gotten into the cab with me. I was in shock. I spluttered. The nerve on this guy. He started barking instructions at the driver, who was clearly confused. My basic understanding of what he said was, "I'm going with her. She's my girlfriend. Take us away from the city." I'm guessing my stalker had assumed I didn't understand any of his language, but I did, and that message worried me. I was alone in a car with 2 strange men in a foreign country, and one had the explicit intent of kidnapping me. What kind of ridiculous position is that to be in? So, I did what any insane, terrified person would do. I screamed, illegibly, in no language that made any sense. I did everything that I could to convey to the driver that I was unsafe. I made strange wailing noises and basically said no over and over again. The driver looked at both of us, confused out of his fucking mind, waiting for the prank cameras, I'm guessing. After about a minute of me screaming at the driver and my stalker, who had begun to touch my hair from the backseat despite me swatting him away multiple times, the driver got the shits and said something very threatening in their language. Then he turned the keys, walked around to the stalker in the backseat, and verbally abused him, waving his keys in his face. The stalker man then put on this "what can you do, face. He then finally got out of the car and tried to tug on my hair as he got out. The driver took me into my apartment, where in his language I brokenly tried to explain what had happened. Turned out this lovely gentleman did speak a little English, so I tried to give him the full story as best as I could. He drops me home 40 minutes later, tried to refuse a fee, but I stuck 3 times the actual fare in the driver's door as I got out. I'll never be able to thank him properly for picking me up on the universal language of distress and handling it with such kindness.
Number 2.
I love staying up late. Watching television until 3 AM is my bread and butter. Suffice to say, this is the usual thing for me when I'm home alone. With my dad going away for work every 2 weeks and coming home for one, it was very easy for me to get away with it while I was still in school. And for context, I lived with just my dad, as my mum passed away from cancer when I was only 12 years old. But I wasn't completely alone though. I had a tuxedo cat with the most fitting moniker, Tuxedo. I've had him since I was 16, and he's kept me company during the many long Canadian winter nights when I was alone by myself. His two favourite places to sit were the small red couch on the right-hand side of the television, and the small table that was placed in front of the large living room window. I also occupied the big red couch right in front of the television. One more important thing to note is that my dad always insisted I close the curtains on the large living room window when it became nighttime. To him, he thought it was dangerous to let people see into the house, as it could tempt them to break in. But in my mind, I always figured no one would be dumb enough to break into a house with the lights on, instead of a house with no lights on at all. So, I usually just left them open the entire 2 weeks he was away, because laziness. So, on this particular night, I was watching a documentary. I think it was about some couple being held hostage somewhere in Australia. These kinds of documentaries would be on very late, which wasn't a problem for 18-year-old me in the slightest. Tuxedo obviously felt differently as he had chosen to gaze outside the living room window instead. As he had just entered the commercial break, Tuxedo started giving soft cries as his eyes were staring in the direction of the front door, which was on the left side of the window. He usually does this if he sees someone outside at the door, which was more commonly during the daytime than at nighttime for obvious reasons. And it was actually very out of the ordinary for Tuxedo to do this so late. At first, I assumed it might have been an outdoor cat or wild rabbit by the door, but I could tell Tuxedo's wail was especially worrisome, so I decided to check it out for myself. Here's the layout of my front door entrance. Tuxedo and I were on the top floor, but the entrance was at a lower level that was between the top floor and the basement. There was a small staircase that went down from the top floor towards the front door, and a second small staircase that went further down away from the doors to the basement. Hopefully that gives you a good image of my house. So, I'm standing at the top of the staircase, about to go down and open the door to see for myself, when I see a large, shadowy figure in the frosted glass of my front door. I nearly collapsed to the ground when I saw this. It was definitely not my dad, and 11 PM at night, it was certainly not something I expected to see. I could tell whoever this was had something in the door and was trying to pry it open. At that moment, something came over me that I can't explain. It might have been the fact that I knew I had no one in the house to help me, or the fact that I felt an urgency to protect Tuxedo from this intruder, but I grabbed my cell phone off the arm of the couch and threw on the lights over the front door. The shadowy figure was now fully visible and clearly startled as our eyes met through the frosted glass, his face displayed in a jagged reflection. "Leave now! I'm calling the police! Leave!" I didn't even get to finish before he was dashing off my yard and into a car across the street. Before I could even tell the make or the model, let alone the license plate, he was gone. All that remained was a crude crowbar on the front step. Now, it's up for debate what that man was at my house for. I certainly didn't recognize him in the few seconds I looked at him. While this definitely shattered my imagined immunity from danger if the lights were still on, part of me wonders if it might have still attacked if I wasn't awake that night. One thing is for sure though, Tuxedo saved my life that night. I don't even want to imagine what might have happened if Tuxedo wasn't looking out the window that night.
Number 3.
On a rainy night in the era before cell phones, I was 18, walking a very long way home from work, and I foolishly accepted a ride home from a strange man. Small town girl living in her lonely world, and I had just gone off a double shift. He was elderly and acted genuinely concerned for me, and I saw a Bible in the back seat. Probably safe, right? The car was old and broken, and he had to get out to open the door for me. It took him a while, as he had trouble walking with a bum leg. He told me the passenger door didn't open from the inside. I immediately felt weird, but years of nice girl training told me that he's gone to so much trouble, don't say no. We chatted for a while and he politely complimented my uniform, my hair, and told me that I looked like his late wife and that her spirit must have led him to help me get home. It sounded very sweet the way that he told it. The conversation turned to if I was still in school, what my hobbies were like, and gradually turned to whether or not I was on my period, which was rude, but acted like it was going to be the punchline of a joke, so I laughingly asked why he wanted to know. He said, very calmly, "Because if you're fertile, we should start trying for a family right away." Oh shit. He said that God had kept him lonely for many years, but now, because I looked so much like his late wife, it was clear I was meant to be his, so he could start life over again and finally have lots of children like his wife was unable to do. He grabbed my hand and kissed it and said, "I can't wait to show you our new bed." I told him that I forgot something at work. He told me I could get it tomorrow. I told him that I needed to pee and he said that I could hold it until we got home. He wasn't going to let me out. He kept talking about how things were different back then, and how men are the head of the household, that women are supposed to follow their fathers and husbands, and God says this and God says that. He talked about his wedding day, how his wife's father had given her to him. So I blurted out, "You're going to have to get my father's permission to marry me before taking me to your house, right? God wouldn't want that, right? I mean, you need to do that because otherwise we would be living in sin, and the marriage bed is not holy," which I remember from many days of church sermons. He got very offended and told me that he knew the Bible better than I did, and of course he knew to ask for my father for permission. I told him that we couldn't live together in sin and that we should go to my house before going home, and reminded him that the street wasn't far. Still, trying to keep the conversation light and joking, I told him that's what a godly man would do, and he wholeheartedly agreed. Then we got to the street where I had previously told him that I lived. He then asked me which house was my parents'. I gave him a fake house number, far away from mine, and had him drop me there. He wanted to come inside. I told him that I needed to let my parents know about God sending me a husband before he could meet them. I then told him that it would take a few days, to come back tomorrow. He said, "I'll give you a few minutes, but then we need to be on our way." I told him to drive around the block so I could have time to pack my clothes. He nodded and finally opened the car door. I ran to the house's door, waved to him until he drove away, then sprinted to my house, where I lived alone. Then double-bolted my door and put the couch in front of it that night. I never saw him again. I did not call the police, though I wish I did. I moved in with my boyfriend a few days later, and I insisted on waiting at work until he could pick me up every night.
Number 4.
I'm a male. When I was 19 years old, I had a 1-year-old baby boy who I took care of by myself because his mother wasn't around. I also had a best friend who lived only 1 block away from my house, and he just had a baby as well. It was about 9:30 at night, and my baby was not falling asleep, so I was bored and decided to walk to my friend's house and just say hi. I bundled my baby up inside my sweater and zipped it up with him facing my chest, so it was impossible to see him in the dark, and then I started to walk. Between my house and my friends is a small trailer park that was notorious for having Norteno gang population living there. I was aware of this, but my walk was only a 1-block distance, so I wasn't really worried. I got to my friend's house and we hung out for a little while, until my baby finally started getting sleepy. So I decided it was time to walk back home. It was about 10 at night at this point, and really dark and cold as it just reached the winter season. I bundled my baby back up into my sweater and started my walk back to my house. I'm a scrawny white boy who's been picked on and mugged and jumped and beaten up by gangsters in my town several times before, so it only takes seeing one of them for my anxiety to start kicking into panic. I saw 4 of them standing on the sidewalk in front of the trailer park in my direct path to my house. I started to get very nervous because I could only see silhouettes of them, so I decided to cross the street to walk past them on the other side of the street. But as I did this, I noticed 2 of them copy my exact movements, but in my direction. The other two men paced around where they were as if they were keeping watch or standing by in case I tried to run for them. That's when I knew they had bad intentions and they were after me specifically. I honestly didn't know what I was going to do or what I could even do. I just gripped my baby tight and looked down at him. He looked at me with dreary eyes, halfway asleep. I prayed to myself and wished that I had never decided to take this walk to begin with. The two men got closer and I walked faster, but the way they were walking would intercept my path, no matter where I tried to go. I knew I wouldn't be able to run with my baby inside of my shirt. I was screwed. What were they going to do? What was I going to do? The two men approached me without speaking a word. They started laughing quietly and then looked down to see my baby's head barely poking out of the top of my sweater. They simply turned around 180 degrees and walked back to where they came from without a word. Then they all disappeared back into the shadows. I cannot tell you how relieved I felt. The sigh of relief I let out was so heartful and sincere I cannot describe with words how good it felt. I walked home much faster and decided that would be the last of my late night walks, especially with my baby. After that, I had the most confusing emotions running through my head. I was so grateful in a very weird way. I respected the gangsters for what they decided to do when confronted with the fact that their victim was carrying a baby. Either they feared that mugging or hurting someone with a baby would result in a much bigger consequence than they wanted, or they actually just had some heart in there somewhere deep down. At least one of them must be parents themselves, or came from a loving family. I don't know, but seriously, fuck those guys for doing what they do to innocent people, and I thank those guys for having some level of decency in their souls. Hey guys, it's the Grim Reader here. You might be wondering, why do you sound like this? I think I'm having this throat infection, which will probably mean that... Actually, no. Hopefully, if it gets worse, then maybe video productions will slow down, but hopefully it won't. Hopefully I'll be fine. So basically in 3 days max, hopefully in 2 days, I should upload again. Yeah, actually, it was quite difficult recording this one because my throat is a bit messed up, and when my Adam's apple goes up and down, it sort of hurts, if you know what I mean. Anyway, you get the point. Hopefully, I don't have some sort of throat infection which will stop me from making these videos for you guys. If you enjoyed, you know the routine. I mean, surely you don't need me to tell you. Oh yeah, of course, add me on Snapchat, follow me on Instagram. No, I don't have Instagram. I know a lot of you are asking me, to make one, or if I have one, but I don't, and I don't think I'm gonna make one anytime soon. So yeah, with that said, thank you very much for listening and making it this far, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, it's the Grim Reader here. You might be wondering, why do you sound like this? I think I'm having this throat infection, which will probably mean that... Actually, no. Hopefully, if it gets worse, then maybe video productions will slow down, but hopefully it won't. Hopefully I'll be fine. So basically in 3 days max, hopefully in 2 days, I should upload again. Yeah, actually, it was quite difficult recording this one because my throat is a bit messed up, and when my Adam's apple goes up and down, it sort of hurts, if you know what I mean. Anyway, you get the point. Hopefully, I don't have some sort of throat infection which will stop me from making these videos for you guys. If you enjoyed, you know the routine. I mean, surely you don't need me to tell you. Oh yeah, of course, add me on Snapchat, follow me on Instagram. No, I don't have Instagram. I know a lot of you are asking me to make one, or if I have one, but I don't, and I don't think I'm gonna make one anytime soon. So yeah, with that said, thank you very much for listening and making it this far, and I'll see you in the next one.